Bob, thank you so much for agreeing to do this video interview with me here today. For the benefit of our audience, can you give us a little bit about your background? Tell us about yourself and where you're from and your practice.
Well, my name is Bob Carleton. Anything I've written is always under the name, the initial J, Robert Carleton. Somewhere early on, I felt like I should represent my legal name, I guess. I don't know. But from my earliest memories, I had an older brother that was Bill. Therefore, I was Bob. Which was my middle name, and that's just the way it went.
So if we're looking you up on the internet and all that, it's going to be J. Robert Carleton.
Yeah, and actually, last time I looked, if you put in quotes the initial J. Robert Carleton, one of my kids informed me that all those hits were me. That I've gone through and read them all. It was just intriguing. I never thought much about that, but that shows my age, I guess. I live in Colorado at this point. I've lived there since 87. But since 1985, I would guess 70%, maybe 80% of my work effort has been in Europe, Africa, and Middle East. Even our U.S. clients. I mean, once you get that international taint, I get even the U.S. clients. It's all the other places they want you to go. I got ecstatic about a big client in Denver that one of the partners turned out. Well, this is really great. Yeah, and then I went to Madrid was the easy duty, and to Kuala Lumpur and Caracas and Sao Paulo and but you get it, and in some ways it almost is a taint.
Well, you've been there and done that. And there's some safety,
well, but then when you start
risk.
trying to do something long, sometimes there've been some really intriguing projects. I have the misfortune, I don't know, whatever. I've always been able to find things to do that are really absolutely fascinating and get involved with. There's never been a lack of things to investigate and go do.
Well,
and as a result, the finances have never been. You do good work, the money comes. How much of my life was normal, I don't know. But I got probably I guess my first exposure to ISPI. I don't remember what.
Well, tell us about HPT. How did you enter this world here? What?
Well, when I got into the world, okay, then we got to go back. I was back in the '60s, going to San Francisco State. I was in clinical psychology. I was also doing a whole lot of work in small groups, group interventions, and back then T groups were a big deal, and in-depth research into T groups and how they work. So I was coming ahead, and I was painfully aware, in my clinical side, very much into behavioral approach, but I was painfully aware of how much an individual will alter regardless of what they will do on their own. They almost become another individual in the group. And the more intense and enveloping and involving the group, the more it alters them. And they alter the group, as well. So from my very early beginnings in school, I had a foot in both of those camps. But I was going through a clinical psych. Now, it's somewhat apocryphal, but it's very true. The reality is I was doing my internship, one of my earliest internship period at Langley Porter, which is a mental health institution attached to the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. Now, if you can imagine what it took to get sent to a mental ward in San Francisco in the late '60s, there were some interesting incidents that I talk about at times and around the bar that gave me a real epiphany that there had to be a better way to make a living than this. Nothing else this wasn't the environment I wished to immerse myself in.
Yeah.
Moving ahead, I still have this fascinating, I have always been driven by the question of why do people behave the way they do at any given moment. That's why I got into the psychology in the first place. And I had a clue that I already knew, even before in my first year going to school, that people will act differently depending on what group they're in as well. And so I already had, so that's why I began that dual path right away. I mean, to my own discredit, I suppose, I'm one of the few that wasn't going into it because I was trying to find out my own demons. That had to sneak up on my ass later. So I was really into this. I just fascinated. The idea of human behavior is just absolutely intriguing as all shit. So my desire has always been, I'm interested in anything that has any bearing on why people behave the way they do. So when I decided this particular environment, while necessary, useful, absolutely critical, for very good reasons, but not the one I wanted to reside in, I made the decision to go back and pick up a little bit of schooling on industrial organizational stuff. So I figured I could limit where I'm playing to area people that can hold a job, and that would probably keep the extreme fringe elements out of the equation. And things might be slightly more normal. 40 years later, looking back, I'm not sure that's the case.
So how did you
There's a lot of other things around that.
So how did you come across this group that was NSBI back in those days?
Well, okay, let me give you, it was a two-step process. As I was doing this industrial organizational stuff, all through school, I'd worked at a place called Lawrence Systems. It was a financial services company, very esoteric, particularly for back then, in the 60s and 70s. Field warehousing and collateral control services, a cannery that's starting the season, brings in all their cans and containers and all the stuff they're going to use through the year. Then they put it in a field warehouse there and get financing on the price of those goods. And it gets a warehouse that can give collateral, but it's on site, so you can take stuff out, you can deal with it. Oil and tank yards, collateral control financing on your receivables was brand new then. Or financing on goods in process, all the stuff that are going through the manufacturing process. They have a value. Can we leverage that? This is a company that did all that kind of stuff. It was a small, about 1,500 people nationwide. And it was owned by a guy, he's a multimillionaire that also owned Allen Vineyards and a bunch of other stuff. But it was a little small executive office. But warehouse control and documents and certificates and all that shit was all centrally done. And I had a job along with 4 other guys, and we were all university students. We worked the mail supply room, and we're shipping out stuff all over the country, and we were run the mail runs. And it was a little small office, 3 stories, maybe a dozen executives there. But it was this between 1,500 and 2,000 people at that time scattered across the country. And you hear all kinds of shit walking around, talking, and they get to know us, And they had no personnel systems. They had some OSHA issues that had come up. They had a couple of EEOC complaints, and they didn't have any of that kind of stuff organized. And so on a wild hair, after an evening session at the university, I sat down and wrote out a little proposal about putting in a personnel function, organize and clean up all this shit, put the little business case with it, did the whole thing. And next morning, dropped it on the president's desk with the morning mail run. And he called me up on Thursday afternoon, talked about it a little bit, and he called me up again on Friday and had a couple of other guys in. And Monday morning I came back as director of personnel for Lawrence Systems nationwide and began to do all that stuff. And again, it wasn't because I was interested in personnel issues. The point was, they got all these people, and we're trying to do something as an organization, and all this stuff isn't happening in places that it should. And now we got to get some rationality to, well, there's a bunch of shit you got to clear out of the way. We got to get some rationality on pay systems. I mean, Maslow wasn't good for much, but I mean, bless him, theoretically good for a whole lot on an intellectual basis, but in practical application, damn little. But there are some, back then, there were actually some applicable basics. We had no pay scales and things were really screwed up, and we had every kind of way you could think of being wrong, and there was crazy stuff done. and job descriptions. But so first put some rationality to this organizational system is really all I was trying to do. And now, once we got the rationality in place, we can begin to manipulate the variables and see if we can get really high performance, really outperform the others and do this kind of stuff. But what I found out was once you put that whole system together, I now had this big bureaucratic thing that had to be fed and managed, and it was really boring at that point. So I looked and realized, okay, well, among other things we were doing, we had a battery of tests, psychometric battery, that I had shepherded all the way through the EEOC procedures to be acceptable in the management positions and supervisory positions and field examiners. And I was doing these evaluations, putting all this battery of tests together, doing these write-ups. Well, that was the thing you couldn't really get anywhere else. And I literally was driven at that time, honest to God, by this view of, I had created this beast. I had opened the company up, and I had an obligation to them. And I was bored, but I wasn't going to leave until I made sure that everything that was supposed to be done could be done. And I couldn't find any way to get that done. So I made at that time a very hard decision. I said, all right, look, I want to go find something else to do that's more interesting. But I don't know where else to get this, so I'll continue doing this bit for you. And that's my first consulting contract. Never had a design on being a consultant. Went home, and a month later, still roaming around trying to figure what the hell to do, but feeling bad about bringing no income in. My wife was working full-time as a secretary at this weird company in San Rafael, California called Independent Learning Systems. And there was a bunch of guys that came out of Westinghouse Learning that had got some financing out of Canada, and a big multimillionaire Texan actually was the financing, but Westinghouse Learning used to be part of it. And there's a long trail there, but suffice it to say, it had come to the point that they'd gotten some financing for this company, and they were going to redo the education market, aimed particularly at the university market, and replace textbooks with learning systems, and thereby release the instructors from the drill of the routine and allow them to spend their time in the more valuable interaction with the student. It was a cool idea.
Yeah.
All right, and there was a bunch of people that were putting this kind of shit together. Well, they were doing some really good designs, and they captured a big chunk of the psychology market, and the intro psychology market, and the intro stat market across the country, but they had a mess in their production delivery, getting the shit printed, packaged, warehoused, shipped. Well, at that point in time, I had more years on my resume handling shipping logistics nationwide from all those years through school and up into graduate school. But I thought, well, what's the shit? They got this little company of a few hundred people. There was this interesting new concept at the time where personnel, the realization that personnel had become, by definition, was going to have a lot of administrivia that they're responsible for, which has now morphed into HR. And there was this movement at the time that, okay, to get back to what the whole original point of having somebody looking after the human resource was about, there was an ombudsman model. You had all this stuff that had to be done over personnel was doing that, but you could have ombudsmen that then were trying to reflect the needs of the people trying to get things done, okay? So I went into my wife's office and told the guy who was in charge of shipping and supply, a guy named John Lohr, who some people in this society may know. And I said, look, I can solve all that shit for you, but I got a counter proposal. I need something out of it myself. I ended up sitting down with Sid Wilson, who was the president of the company. I said, look, if I can do an ombudsman HR kind of system here and play with that, I'll take care of all of this shipping logistics. Now, the people that were gathered at that company included Lloyd Homme. Lloyd was one of the grandfathers in the place that was providing a lot of the direction. Don Toasty was there. Jimmy Evans, an old name that many people have forgotten out of this society. But, Jimmy Evans was there. I mean, there was a whole bunch of people that were, they had come out of Westinghouse Learning, out of the Job Corps practices of putting stuff together, and they were coming to grips with the fact that it just wasn't about 90-90 criterion anymore. We'd lock that one. That was easy. Mm-hmm. You get 90-90 criterion on anything, just about, but son of a bitch, you wait 90 days and go out and look, and it ain't happening in the market. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably about the same time Bob Mayer began to be thinking through, or it may have been earlier than that he had that 45 caliber training test, but that that kind of thing came up. So what else is going on? But in the meantime, we had this big interest in schools, so we had an experimental school going as well, mm-hmm. that was being financed by the company. And that was my first exposure to these folks. My first ISPI conference was somewhere in that late 60s, early 70s, whenever the conference was in San Francisco. I don't remember what year it was. That was my first exposure to ISPI. And there was a lot of interesting things. There was a guy I got involved in deep conversation with that was at that conference. I don't know how he was at any other. Ivan Horvath, mm-hmm. Russian. And he got me with a comment early on that has meant so much to me throughout all the rest of this excursion into organizational dynamics and human performance in groups. As he looked at me, he says, you have to understand, the real world is made up of phenomena, not problems. Understand the phenomena, master the world. At that time, the Skinnerian-Rogerian debate was in full sway. Mm-hmm. And part of Ivan's point was, I don't care which camp anything goes into. He was what I would call one of the early functionalists. Mm-hmm. And there's another lot of stuff that's come since. That word's become a lot of meaning with me. Yeah. Later, but so that gave me that exposure, and right away I'm sitting now. The funding for that company went away, and there was a guy at Bank of America, vice president, radical guy, power broker, who was going to do something with training. He had read a book by Malcolm Warren called Training for Results. Now, Malcolm was one of the old Training Research Forum folks. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And the Training Research Forum was, at that time, was the breath hours. I think Gary was a part of it. Mm-hmm. Ron Zemke, mm-hmm. Another name is now gone. But they were that group getting together and trying to, say, come on, let's cut through all the other stuff and try and be a select group to get down to the essence of things. And in his Training for Results, it was that whole focus. It was taking into account Mayer's thoughts already. I remember he had, in his first edition of the book, there was a thing about management training, and it was 10 alternatives to shift management behavior. Number 10 was training. Mm-hmm. And his point was, if the first 9 weren't in place, number 10 wouldn't work anyway. Mm-hmm. And it was that first thing of beginning to say, yeah, having the skill and knowledge is important, but the context it works within better be rationalized, or no amount of that's going to work. Mm-hmm. It was really cool. So Roger Christie was wanting to take the training department at Bank of America and try to reflect the stuff that Malcolm Warren had been talking about. And Malcolm Warren gave him a reference to Jimmy Evans. Mm-hmm. Now, like I said, Jimmy's not a name known here anymore, but man, he was the EBCO reading system was breakthrough on remedial reading stuff. He was on a number of presidential commissions on reading and education. Mm-hmm. Malcolm Warren had told Roger to talk to Jimmy Evans, who was there out in California. And Jimmy and I had a lot of fun together at ILS, and so he said, well, here, he gave me the recommendation. So basically, I negotiated my own terms, and I became a senior training analyst at Bank of America, mm-hmm. under the VP's arm, told to transform how training is looked at and to do. So my first project ever was looking at new accounts. And they had data that at that time Bank of America was getting 1.1 new accounts per customer was their average. And they had data that knew that the more accounts a customer signs up for, the longer they stayed with the bank, the longer the accounts stay with the bank, the greater the profitability of the account, the big expenses on setting it up in the front end. Okay, all good shit. So they wanted to increase it to 1.5. And I said, cool. And the guys in branch banking had in their mind, clearly, they wanted a new accounts training program. But I had this guy named Roger Christie who said, I want you to do what Malcolm Warren talks about. And at that time, we had, like among other things, at Bank of America, there was a methods research department. I don't know if they still exist. They were a godsend. I mean, so much has been lost around scientific management with the loss of methods research and those kinds of methodologies. The Taylor's gotten blackballed and people, and the first person that every time I read, well, you know my tendencies in the society guy, I guess honestly. I got to admit that every time I come across somebody that talks about Taylorism in a negative mode, I begin to attack their bloody fucking ignorance. Sorry, I didn't get off-colored, but it's real ignorance. Not understand what that was about. But these method research guys, they had data, time and motion data, on everything. Every piece of paper, every process, everything that came into the bank, they had time and motion data on. And they had it stratified by size and complexity of the bank. Holy shit. I was in instant love with these guys over at Methods Research. Nobody ever talked to them. And interesting data. And then I said, okay, next thing we're going to do, we're going to go out and look, and we don't really understand what the environment is here, this branch environment. So I set up a sample, as I would I was still in graduate student mode. Okay, let's set up a research sample. We'll take 200 branches. We'll make 100 of them outstanding branches, 100 of them experimental. We'll stratify it based upon the relative percentage of branch size and the categories that we already had from branch locations analysis. Looking at that stuff. And we'll do a field survey. And we'll go out and we'll interview everybody in the branches and everything around. We'll understand the environment totally. And we came back and we did. And we had it. And then we designed the system to go in. And there was a training component. It was relatively minor, but mainly we redid the job descriptions and we changed reporting relationships that were mandatory in branches, changed how branches reported in some stuff, and had this whole, and changed the time allotment procedures that showed up on managers of the branch managers' evaluations because we understood this time and motion study stuff. Put a whole coordinated program together, put it in place, and documented that the controls over the experimentals increased net profit by, God, it's been so long. I don't know, 4.6, 4.7 million in 3 months above the cost of the program over. And then they put it across across the whole state, 1,000 branches in the state. And I'd won a little bit of license, and I got to run sort of rampant around. And in the process of running around, then I began to talk to more guys in ISPI, and I began hiring people like Toasty. And I'd met Bubba at the ISPI, Joe Harless at ISPI, and I got budget and shit. So and the playground, that was the most important part. I had a spigot and a playground, and so then I could bring in the people that were really cool, and we could play and figure out what was going on. And so that's how I kept my connections. I kept involved in ISPI, and then in the process of looking around, there was this internal group that had absolutely fascinating phenomena called the credit card system, Bank of America. And they had this interesting phenomena of a growth cycle, steady growth month to month, into a sudden peak in December. And then it would peak, and then it would drop down to the point that it had been the previous September, not January, September, when it started the big steep curve. And it'll start the same cycle and start getting in and up. So it was just stair-stepping up. And they had this whole system that had grown to 2 centers, I forget how many million cards, We had about 3,000 people involved in the credit card systems, and it had never been rationalized. Everybody kept waiting for it to level off and give a base before getting into major structural revamp, because you've got a major system that's running, it's very dynamic. And they'd finally come to the decision that this damn thing wasn't going to stop. And so I got involved in the analysis, and I created the position of a performance officer, one that's looking at the whole system and trying to balance the outputs, because it was going to be a dynamic, constantly changing system. And we'd uncovered some really interesting shit in the analysis. I mean, I can remember first going through the gas transactions from gas stations. It was a special process because it was done with the oil companies. And there's a point where the draft comes in and a clerk takes it and they make, I don't remember the exact numbers, but you get the concept. They made like 3 copies of the draft. They go into 3 different files, and they go into these different files, and then the thing goes on. And the thing to keep in mind is, in the key characteristic about the credit card system, when things happen on a 24-hour cycle. A complete work cycle was 24 hours. It happened, took 3 shifts. So different things occurring on different shifts. Nobody had played sales ticket in a long time. Being a young man, still remembering the chemical approaches to finals, I did a couple of 24-hour stints. I would just walk through the company, 24 years, going on all shit, and just seeing how all this stuff worked. And we came across this interesting phenomena. We had this file room that at that time must have been, I don't know, 30 feet by 100 feet, big-ass file room, where all these gas receipts going in, these copies that are being made. Nobody was ever pulling them out or going back to them. Everybody assumed that they were necessary for somebody on another shift. Back in history, they had been. But they were just still going on. Just crazy shit, but I'm not looking at it. I mean, I've hit stuff like that since around the world, different places. But it was fascinating work doing that kind of stuff. So I did that for the credit cards, and then created the job at National Bank of America to start doing that nationally. And then I began to realize the power of going out. This is where I began to shift back to consulting again. We took on the task at performance improvement teams in the bank. Basically, here's the way it worked. It was a brainstorm. Nobody had ever done it. The idea was, if a member bank gets to the point that they're losing their ass, and Flatbush National Bank in New York had gone under on their credit card. I mean, it's a very volatile instrument to use, a credit card. And D. Hawk, the president of National Bank of America, decided that never happened again. Now, they became Visa Inc. It's now for current
Change your
names.
mind.
Yeah, but I mean, the Visa is the name of the company now. That this was the forerunner of Visa. It became Visa while I was there, I guess, during that period. Anyway, he didn't want any other banks to fail that way. So here's the idea. If any member bank raises their hand and says, okay, we got a serious problem, we want a pit team, you have got 24 hours to get on site. You've got 48 hours to figure out what's going on. You say yourself it's a 24-hour cycle, go through 2 cycles, you ought to have it analyzed. I'll give you data, then think about it, and then debrief the executives. And here's the way it's going to work. If they can come back 6 months later and show me they've done everything you said and they're not profitable, you're fired. Are we clear? Yeah. Now, different times, one of the tit for tats there was, okay, we're going to take care of you too. I didn't realize how much of what he meant. We flew first class everywhere. Can you imagine in the late 70s, a first class flight, ready for this, from Cincinnati to Lexington? Because I remember the Delta check-in kind of looking at it funny, saying, you can't even take off your seatbelt. It was a funny environment, but they were very focused on data. Dee was focused, and we had that, and the act of going out and hitting all these different places you begin to realize there are general patterns, but there's always that context. I was continuing to use people that I had known, and then the real shift into where it is today began. It was, God, I think it was 71 or 72.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go back and look at a resume to figure it out. My daughter was around 4, and I came home, and she was hiding behind her mom. See, here's part of what we
Did
did.
recognize you?
When we started doing this support thing for the credit cards, the other thing, Dee said, okay, you can have some other people, but we're gonna do this globally, all right? So basically, we divided up the world, and I had responsibility for all the member banks from the Mississippi River east to the Ukraine. That was my responsibility. Another guy had South America, another guy had Asia. You know, so it was a whole lot of travel. It was fascinating. Had a lot of fun. But then I said, okay, you know, I got to spend some time at home. So I took a job in Alameda County. This is an important piece, I think. Alameda County was a civil service system in California, and I was working for the Civil Service Board, in effect. You know, this is sort of independent. And I was given all the training budget for the entire county. And I took over all the test and evaluation stuff going on as well, because I'd done all this test stuff in the past.
Right.
I had the HR prep. Which, I shouldn't say that. It's necessary. But. So I had that responsibility. And there was a legacy contract. They wanted to have a management system that went across the entire county area. You know, we had hospitals, libraries, you know, prison, you know, weights and measures, and all kinds of stuff in the county. A bunch of big. Alameda County is a big one, Oakland and all that. And it was really cool. But they had this legacy contract with a guy out of Sacramento. Was an ex-preacher that was doing a supervisory program. And I thought, holy shit, I'm stuck with this. You know, but I've got to, so my boss told me, Al Nardi said, okay, the first things first, this is a government agency now, you've got the next 30 days, you've got to spend this $29,000 that's in the budget. Now this is like 71, it's a shitload of money. So I sat there for a day and I picked up the phone, called Don Toasty and said, give me an invoice for $29,000. He said, for what? I said, yeah, fuck if I know. Just send me the invoice, I'm going to pay it, and we'll figure it out over the next year. So he did. Then I turned to my next step was, okay, now I got this legacy contract. It's this silly ex-preacher from Sacramento, some guy named Bill Daniels. And all right, shit. So I began to meet with Bill Daniels. Son of a gun. What a fascinating man. I thought, what the fireworks would be if I put Bill Daniels and Don Toasty together. But Bill really understood group context. Really understood it well. To the same degree that Donald understood individual context, behaviorism, applied the whole operant. And here Bill was sitting over on this group dynamic thing. He was in fact tied in with Lickert's Institute for Social Research. I thought, well, shit. We're going to have some fun. And we did. And we created a management system that we could apply across the entire county. People that are cleaning flood ditches, up through the folks who were supervising social services or probation, into the courts. You know, I learned a few things about training that aren't relevant anywhere else. You know, you don't put DAs and public defenders in the same room. You don't put a judge in training ever. Judge is God with a little g. You can advise and you can befriend, but you don't train. No. But, you know, Donald and Bill and I had a good time. And we got it done, and so then we formed a company called Operants Incorporated. Back into San Rafael. Offered a deal to the county, said, look, we want to take all the stuff we're doing, we'll give you a percentage of what we can sell to this stuff. We're going to package and we got into that supervisory management training market. And the idea Going back to one of Bubba's early cool references, if you want to do anything relevant in this field, you need a money fan. It's something you can turn on over here and it'll blow money away while you're off doing shit that's relevant. So we thought we were going to get our money fan from turning on this thing with these packages on supervision, so we could then go off and continue doing the really fun stuff. Well, one of the fun stuff that we had that time was with AMC down in San Jose on the M2 military Bradley fighting vehicle. Have you by chance read a book called The Pentagon Wars or seen the film on the Pentagon Wars? I highly recommend it. It is one of the most entertaining pieces that is a wonderful set of observations about the realities of organizational dynamics and the dysfunction that is brought in. HBO made it into an absolutely insane black comedy. But the events that are depicted all the way through it are right out of the book, and it's real stuff. And this was the guy, it was when that had been the big training fiasco, and they brought in the ISD requirement model in the military. All right, and they went ahead and they were doing at the same time doing this cross-service validation of new platforms. So like the Bradley was the first Army platform that the final evaluations had to be overseen by an Air Force colonel.
Okay.
Because they were trying to get some rationality back into what was going on. And the tales of there are insane. And we've got our own tales of what was happening with that Bradley. I mean, at one point there was a design going through the line where on the outside of the tank there was a 1 foot by 2 foot white square with a black and red handle sitting in the middle of it. That if you pull the handle, it shuts down all the electronics in the whole thing. On the fucking outside. Somebody had figured it out. Well, a lot of time in peacetime, when we get these active shorts in this kind of gear, particularly when what if the crew's outside the tank? They got to have some way to do this. It's a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. They were right. The application was pretty bloody wrong. The training group who's going on the ISD side says, excuse me?
Yeah.
What is this about? Ended up working at Stephanie, knew somebody in, I think it was Steph. I may have it all screwed up at this point, it goes back, but there were connections down to whatever the base is in Georgia where they do the canine training, and developed a little sequence that they set up their chain of command of how they could train the dogs to disable these vehicles. And finally got it at the point that somebody said, this is dumb. But see, we're working on skill and knowledge transfer, and we're still doing this organizational stuff, and it kept coming back in. That kept changing. As the years went on down, we sold operants to the Forum Corporation in Boston, and then that took about a year for me. It took less for me. I went to work for a client at Southland, and I was back into data heaven. That's 7-Eleven stores. I could take 100 stores for experimental and 100 stores for control and book one of the corporate jets and run my team back around. And we had 2,000, 3,000 variables, whatever the hell it was, they're measuring in the stores. I go out and play. God, it was a riot. And fun shit that you begin to dig up, the subtleties of how, and quick analysis, and that, looking at what's the purpose of the organization. Dealing with all of that was a lot of fun. But after about 3 years, it got burned out, and then this thing in Europe had happened, and I was getting a weekly phone call from Don Toasty. And Donald kept saying, okay, aren't you bored yet? And I said, well, yeah, I'm starting to get bored. Well, then come on, get your ass over here. We've got a 70,000 person organization, and we need to turn on that here, nobody knows how to do it.
This is British Airways?
The genesis of that was the Thatcher government was going to sell it off.
Right.
Was losing money, 144 pounds a minute, whatever the hell the number was, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, had been for years. Warner Burke had written articles on the fact that he had noticed that the product life cycle curve, if you took it on a logarithmic scale, matched pretty much the organizational life cycle curves. Okay? And in products, we had learned that when it goes up, when a product hits the life cycle peak and goes over, there's a series of things you can do to go through a transformation and give that product rebirth before it drops down very far and start a whole new growth path up. And he had supposed, well, why can't you do that for organizations? Because if you look at the time, life on the Fortune 500 or any of these long-term measures, again, those curves look very similar. But it hadn't been done. It was just an interesting idea. And in 1985, Nick Georgiadis was hired by Colin Marshall, hired away from the World Bank by Colin Marshall, who had been hired by the Thatcher government to run BA. And he said, Nicky, we got to turn the thing over. And Nicky called Warner, and they sat down and said, okay, let's make up a list of consultants we want working on this. Doesn't matter where they live in the world. The airline goes everywhere, and there's plenty of empty seats. So, and there were about 8 of us that were dumb enough to bite. And we got fired 3 times in the first year. It's amazing how many ways there are to really screw up. Particularly when you had to see, when Gary and I were reconstructing things later, well, more than Gary, when it was T7, we're all joining and reconstructing things later. We were looking back at these days and reconstructing what each of us were doing. Gary had just gotten in and going off in this whole thing at Motorola that was beginning with the productivity production problem. And we were beginning over there with British Airways, but they had defined it very clearly as a culture problem. Their fleet was as new as anybody's. The catering menu was as good as anybody's. The schedule was as good as anybody's. And BA stood for bloody awful. They were the least favorite carrier across the Atlantic. And Colin had determined it can't be anything in the infrastructure. It's got to be in the nature of the people. And then the survey said, yeah, BA means bloody awful. So we're coming in here saying, okay, we got a people problem. Gary's going in over here saying, okay, we got organizational systems problem. We got a production problem. And we started in different places. But the interesting thing that came out of those T7 meetings was how that each of those processes had grown up and had done the parts they started with, but didn't have the solution yet. And both had then crossed over into the other domains to finish it up, because in the end, you're dealing with the whole bloody thing.
The infrastructure and the culture.
Yeah, and I guess to jump into where things have been going and what my current frustration is, since we've now got into ISPI, this didn't exactly on the interview line, but toward the end of the T7 period, one of the frustrating things was the realization that there were so damn many variables to deal with. And we kept adding new ones. And Gary in the beginning absolutely hated the culture shit. Because it was messy and it wasn't bloody convenient and didn't fit in easily, and I agreed with him 100%, and I think that helped. He wasn't used to that kind of response. I said, shit, I agree with you. And then Gary remembered Ivan. And that was always my touchstone. Okay, you don't like what I call it. There's this phenomena going on that's creating this kind of thing. Label it as you wish, but let's talk about the bloody behavior. And it happens. It's predictable. It's reliable. And patterns don't occur randomly. So we got to incorporate this somehow. But then it kept getting bigger. But at the same time, as we got more sensitive to organizational data, we began to realize that, yeah, we were creating problems too. We had less time than we thought to deal with these. I think we, in the last 12, 15 years, at most, have begun to come to grips with the fact of what we do when we open up that Pandora's box of analysis. We have discovered the power of focus groups in truly giving us sensitive, cross-functional, cross-level data about how the organization works. We get really good data out of it. And more often than not, we're not seen doing anything with it. And we're only now coming to grips with the fact that, look, the minute you do that, within a week of those focus groups, the entire organization knows what was laid on the table knows all the stuff that's out there. And what's more, they now know that the executives know. And we're not doing anything about it. And that sends a message whether you like it or not.
Almost force their hand then.
Well, you'll make things worse. It doesn't force their hand because most of them don't have.
They don't react, right.
They don't have enough they don't have enough understanding to realize what's going on. So the time we have to do stuff is narrowing, yet the variables are expanding, and we had an interesting conundrum. And I think the next step, and I know, at least in my conversations with Gary, where we were right before he died, we had a long conversation in Albuquerque, and we went quite a few hours into the evening. And we were going to try to reconvene a new version of the T7 to continue the effort. And we had an idea of we just laid out what the basic parameter. We've got to somehow deal with all this stuff in a systemic manner at speed. And it's pretty dang clear that we're going to have to find a faster way to get all this done. And I had thought about the idea of taking Michael Porter's concept of value add, the value chain. And now here, let me back up again. One of the other things that's very different at the organizational level that we all came to agree on is that we're dealing with processes.
Yes.
Not so much, it's this continuous mechanism. We begin to come to grips with this idea that all organizations, are dysfunctional. It's the nature of the beast. Well, that means that what you're doing is you're trying to put processes in place that surface and settle this before they become endemic, the dysfunctions. And it's a continuous, ongoing process. That's really, if you really go back and look at it, what's at the heart of Kaizen, and a journey that never ends. Well, that's a different way of thinking. We've always thought projects. This isn't project anymore. And so in our talking and dialogue in Albuquerque, we said, okay, how can we get at the heart of the organization? And the idea of Michael Porter's value chain, we thought, the organization exists for a purpose. And there are places in the organization where significant value is added. And if there's competitive edge, it sits in those value add moments. And I think Gary was the first one that said moments, the idea that in this overall process there are these moments where value is created. And so we were talking about conceptually. And then we're also bringing in chaos theory at this point. And look, here's a different way to approach organizational dynamics and how we analyze it, and how we design it, and how we measure it. Step back, take the strategy, find the value add moments. Okay, do the quick scan, go through the organization, find out where these critical points of value are added. There's where you put your X and do your deep dive. Take a core sample, if you have to, down to the operant level. Exactly how is this value added? What are the requirements? What are the detail? And develop metrics for all of those. Now step back into chaos theory. Have the edict. These are the value cores. Everybody else in the organization, we have now defined these value cores in detail and how they work. And if you're not in it, your job is to aid and abet one or more of them. So you take your function, whatever you're doing, and you, if necessary, twist it to aid and abet and support these core values. And we have our metrics there, and that is the formula potentially for a very rapid analysis comparatively and a very rapid redesign. And we know we can use these large group dynamics. Gary had gotten interested in that because of shit we'd been doing. He hadn't tried one of those yet, but I described taking Prudential where we got 900 people in a ballroom for a week and constructed a microcosm of the organization with people of authority in every kind of functional area down there in this basement. And we re-engineered the whole bloody organization, 290 some odd processes. Live. Every time you changed something, you had to go upstream and downstream and check with all the other groups and get their buy-off and sign-off and to see what we could develop. And we found out that, this crazy lady out of the OD network, God, I'm blocking on her name. Brilliant lady that did some work at Boeing, just kind of get involved with the right people in the room. It's amazing what occurs. We had a 3,000 person division completely re-engineered, operating in a new manner within 2 weeks of that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because every division, every department had been represented and had bought off. It was pre-sold to opinion leaders. They had crafted it, and it happened. So now to take that message and apply it back, if we apply that kind of methodology to the issues of those core samples,
Mm-hmm.
right? Use the core samples to say, okay, here's where the value add points that are unique. Now we've got to make sure these are achieved to give this outcome as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else, align yourselves.
So refocus, drop what you were doing that's not adding value to
And
those
use the
values.
chaos theory approach. I mean, break the shit that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I do not ever want to back away from understanding the de-engineering piece that we don't do.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be doing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we are dealing with an organizational problem, there is a repetitive pattern, right? You're predictably not getting what you want.
Right.
Okay? Patterns don't occur randomly. If there's a pattern there, something is maintaining it.
Mm-hmm.
And before you put in an alternative system, you bloody well better understand what's maintaining that current one. Because the smartest thing to do is to de-engineer that puppy while you engineer your other one.
Mm-hmm.
Disconnect those reinforcers. Otherwise, you're just simply throwing another potential attraction into the pond, and the people can choose between the payoff I know and the maybe payoff on this other new one.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way to get rapid change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been, you got my whole career right there. I don't know how much that did with ISPI. ISPI was always a fun place. It's where we happen to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think currently, we've had the discussions before, I think the society's changed.
Yes.
It's no longer what it was. And that's not necessarily a pejorative. We are a professional society. I think the society is a reflection of its current membership, and it was meeting its current membership's needs. Who are we, some old timers, to say, but God damn it, it didn't stay where we had it in the beginning. Okay, so go off and do something else then. I'm sorry, it's no longer the same thing exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's not doing good work. I just feel it's presumptuous, that's all I'm saying.
And there's been a shift between whether we're technology-centric or member-centric.
Yes.
And I think that's the battle. Are we going to cater to what the members want or perceive that they want and need, or are we going to
See, it's
stick to
coming
the
up.
science?
It's coming up in odd shit. I heard, the one here before me. I heard, making it one of those plays up. A lot of people, we used to get a common language. What Danny's been pushing on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, bullshit. What do you mean get a common language? We didn't have one 20 years ago, and we got more done in organizations. If you used a term that somebody didn't understand, they'd say, "Excuse me, could I have an operational definition of what you mean by bleh?"
Yeah.
And you'd give the definition, go, okay, I got the parameters, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
We want to develop a language. Good, that'll add another barrier between us and our clients. The reality of organizational work is that we have to redefine every bloody thing we do into the terminology of that organization if it's going to be real.
Right.
The more that we get stultified in having a proper language, the more difficulty we're going to have in dealing with our clients. We got to be practicing that fleet of footness internally. What's wrong with the old thing of just have good operational definitions? You can get people real quick. But then I'll go back to the other thing that was said, we used to be around here, you got that, where's your data, too?
Mm-hmm.
And you get some quite rude reactions if you didn't have any that was meaningful. We've gotten very, very polite.
Maybe too polite.
I think so.
Let me shift our gears here a little bit here
Sure
to
thing.
talk about where is someone like you? Where are you focused in your current learnings? Where are you trying to increase your knowledge and skill set? What's new on the horizon for Bob Carleton? I mean, your experience with the Tucson 7, the T7 that you were referring to earlier here, gave you a chance to catch up with old friends and colleagues to find out where they had been taking this.
Yeah, and I
their
told you
thing,
we were going to go with it
and
next.
combining it.
That was the thing, that was this whole thing that Gary and I were having in Albuquerque,
Mm-hmm.
there at that fall conference.
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, is one I thought one of the best things that had occurred in the society, and it hasn't made any money, so it's now been discontinued, and again, that's further proof maybe things are altering. Again, and there's another group called the Association for Corporate Growth, ACG.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively new, but man, they've got almost 3,000 members in Denver alone.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're looking at is rapid growth and effectiveness in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe that's the venue. There's another group called the Turnaround Management Association. Now, they're a fascinating group. They're a group who think systemically, not necessarily academically consciously, but this is a group of people whose calling in life is turning around organizations that are in trouble. And they automatically go into it thinking there's a whole bunch of different things that are going to be broken. And it's finding them out and getting them all working. They're an interesting body. You know, they really are. So I know Bill Daniels and I were talking just recently, and that's why I said, let's go over there and look. What am I interested in? Still the same stuff. It's, you know, why do people behave the way they do in groups? I just realized silly epiphanies that the person has who just does what they enjoy doing. I realized in preparation for a presentation, I want to do a presentation here at this conference this year, where I try to immerse people in the consequence of system around HPT and never use system theory. Because I've been yelling system theory for a whole lot of years, and I can't tell that I've had any impact on anybody anywhere at any time. Now, I may be wrong, you know. Anybody can feel free to let me know. It doesn't feel like I've had any impact on anything.
I would guess that you're probably wrong, but you probably had as great an impact as you wish. Much
so I tried to do a different one, and the whole idea was to talk about what we're doing and how a lot of what HPT is doing in reality at the organizational level is making things worse. And we need to step up to that and be aware of it, because at the same time, we could be a real salvation. Nobody is filling this gap of how you keep this organizational behemoth running effectively, and how you embody the ability to continually surface and deal with these dysfunctions that are endemic in the organization. We all sit there and we'll read the Peter Principle. It goes back into the 70s. And say, okay, yeah, that's right. People rise to their level of incompetence, to the level of mediocrity, really, not incompetence. And then they stay there. If they're incompetent, they can get fired. So they rise to the level of mediocrity. Yeah, we can see it. Right. Okay, what are we doing as a performance society to deal with what that phenomena delivers in the organization 10, 20 years down the path? We now have a big chunk of middle management scattered at different levels, embedded as a force for mediocrity and creating new ones all the time. What are you doing to counter it? What are you doing to at least account for it and try to increase the overall efficiency of the organization? That's just what, there's the Paul Principle. Remember that one?
No.
The Peter Principle, the whole idea was you move through the organization to a level of mediocrity. The Paul Principle that came out later, I forget who it was that wrote it, was, yeah, there's also the phenomena of doing the job well and the organization moves around you until you're no longer relevant or you're no longer fit. But you're an honored person and you stay there. Sort of the other half of the same equation. And we know all of these things occur, and we don't incorporate them into how, I mean, what I'm finding, the mindset to me is the old steam locomotive, the good engineer that's always listening to the engine, and every station gets the oil can and the rag and they're walking down around the thing. I mean, in a way, to me, we've got this dynamic that by its very nature, we've got data up the wazoo from all kinds of fields about why organizations are by definition dysfunctional. And why aren't we talking about what are the systems you use to correct and modify and keep dysfunction from becoming endemic? And it should be an ongoing process. And, you know, when I gave that thought, you know, Gary, bless his heart's immediate response was, well, what are the metrics? Because he said, you said very correctly, you don't have any metrics, you're not going to have any ongoing anything.
Mm-hmm.
What are the metrics? And that's what brought us around to that. Well, okay, the core sample. Now we know where to put the metrics. Now let's look at these processes that occur around it. And we've done stuff, you know. And at my Cracker Barrel, I was asking people, how many people here have been involved in team building in these beginning movements into the other stuff? And about half the people raised their hand in each time. And I said, okay. And how many of you had an element built into that to connect the team back into the organization without facing sensors? None of them. Mm-hmm. I said, right. You've now reinforced the silo walls. And you all know what silo mentality is and the problem we've got in organizations. What, are you crazy? But you know, we got to think this through. The data's all around us. We get so immersed in the task, I guess, I don't know. There aren't enough people that step back. And, you know, part of it's confused with this desire to algorithmize everything. You know, you want a bloody formula. I'm sorry, it's not an algorithmic world, it's a heuristic world. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry you don't like it. I'm sorry ISD doesn't teach heuristics anymore. Too bad, because that's what applies to management and organizations. It's all a heuristic. Ain't no algorithms. So we got a whole bunch of people that are very ill prepared to make that move. But it's a fascinating arena. And we have things to bring to it that can be huge payoff. And I've got a problem now. I guess I probably shouldn't put this on video because, well, okay, it's a phenomenon. Two bits of phenomena I guess I want to throw out here because they just speak to reality within that sense of its phenomena, okay? Mm-hmm. It is intriguing to me around ISPI, to take that one first, that I sat there with that Tucson 7 group, and I don't know who the poor soul was that called me to talk about running for office again for ISPI for something, for the board, I guess, I don't know who it was. And I brought it down to the T7 meeting, and there I'm sitting with 6 past presidents of ISPI, and I got a uniform, don't do it. It isn't worth the pain. The only job worth holding, or the only title worth holding in ISPI is past president, and it isn't worth the price you have to pay to get it. I said, you ain't even talking about that yet. I said, I know I'm not. Okay. Now that's telling to me. Mm-hmm. You know?
What would be necessary from your viewpoint here to turn that around?
Well, that was the other telling point I was going to give you, the second one. And it deals with, here's the phenomena, the only way to put it. When these 7 people sat down and looked at each other and said, where's the next generation? Who are the people coming up to replace us? And a flip chart sitting in the corner. I found it fascinating that not a single name went on it. And I mean, I had a couple of colleagues there that I got a little aggressive and pointed and said, bullshit, come on now, you got people working and they're responsible to look around the room at what was represented there, and they had no names going up. It got a little embarrassing and a little uncomfortable, I think. For whatever reason, we talked about it again a second time in a second meeting, and it never came up again. Yet it was always an undercurrent, an underpinning of you know, why. And I had a cursory conversation. Gary and I had talked about trying to reform, like I'd said. And I had a cursory conversation with him. And I said, you know, maybe do we need to look to ourselves and say that are we hemming in people that work around us more than we should? This is not rational. That that a group like us can't sit here and come up, it's not rational, just you and I alone can't sit here and come up with a handful of people that we can say represent, there's me when I was younger, and they're going to do stuff. Why? I don't have an answer. It's extremely troubling to me that we were that's where we were. And we had started the discussion, so when we got onto the paper, we thought, well, okay, we need some people to react to, why don't we reform a group? And we were starting to go through and talk about that. And he took the Lineberry option,
Yes. That.
Yeah. Didn't get permission. Checked out. But now, see, I sit here now, and part of my problem, I tried to get Daniels to come. He had a medical thing he had to do.
Right.
I made a list of people, and a recent letter or email to Mary Northstock. I began making a list of all the people I used to sit and talk with at ISPI. And the thing that really struck me was there were a number of people on that list that were by no means really doing what I do. Here, George Geis. George was a professor at ISD. But George's mind was always intrigued with this greater issue of the organization. And he was thinking back of the university and the plays and stuff there. I mean, it's just where his mind went. I filled up, I don't know how many lines of type in the email with the names of people that used to be around. And I'm down to 2, one of whom is new, and that's Mary. Where I can get involved in discussions. I mean, I have no problem getting involved in discussions that where I enjoy babbling. But to get involved in discussions that really cause me to get deep into my thoughts and to really rethink where I'm doing something and continue to grow. I don't know where to go. It's gotten a little lonely, and I'm not comfortable with it. Daniels isn't either. I think I'm speaking for him out of turn. I know Mary was all of a sudden very interested. I made a comment. I said, if we got really business-like and did a business analysis, if the 3 of us scheduled a weekend in Napa Valley, we would get more quality time together at significantly less cost than ever occurs at an ISBI conference. Why do we limit the times we get together to that conference? This is dumb. And I know Mary's reaction was, count me in, I'm there. But it's a sad commentary. But then I start making value judgments again. Is ISPI in the wrong place? And I just, it doesn't feel right doing that. Things have moved. Things have altered. I'm not happy with I wish I had some more colleagues around to continue this push about how come there isn't another generation? How come there isn't? I can think of a couple of places that I begin to develop some people that I could think of the next generation. And they're all out of this country.
Maybe the society needs to do a better job of showcasing and connecting people who are there are new people coming in, and some of them but you've not mentioned some of those names, and I don't want to bring them up now, but perhaps we just need to find a better mechanism, to connect.
I don't know, Guy, it's possible that we allow the society to suck people up too quick into all kinds of other activities, such that us old farts that are trying to hang around the bar never see them, never get exposure, never have a chance to really know. I don't know. it is an irrational statement right on the surface to say there's not a next generation. That's just patently absurd. There's either something in my filters and screens, or I'm standing in the wrong place, or some combination thereof, where my view is clouded, because it's an irrational conclusion. It makes absolutely no sense. But a vehicle that would allow the continuing exchange of pushing the edges, God, it would be an absolute godsend. There's so much more that we need to do. There's so much more we need to understand. And I mean, this society, I do not know of any other society that effectively does nothing to further that peace. I say functionally, functionally does nothing. Again, the phenomena is, if it's doing it, where is it? The phenomena is, it isn't there. So it's not happening. I don't know why. But whew, it's hard. I was always the young guy in the crowd that I went in, and I'm now paying the toll.
Yes.
But anyway, is there anything else you want, Guy? I know we didn't get to a lot of your questions.
No, actually you did. You
Didn't tell
covered
much of
quite a bit of
stories.
them, not in the sequence I was intending to cover them,
Okay.
but I think we did.
Fair enough.
But Bob, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts here with us on this video, and for your longtime contributions to both human performance technology and to this professional society here. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank